Have you ever just looked around at your life and felt completely stuck? Like, no matter how hard you work or how much you struggle, you just can't seem to break through your current ceiling? Well, you are in the exact right place. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're looking at a fascinating philosophical essay by Su Feng. It unpacks exactly why we get stuck, and more importantly, how our internal mindset completely dictates our external reality. It's a concept centered around two words: patterns and endings. Okay, let's dive into this. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover patterns and endings, the trap of comparison, praising your enemies, enduring for the ending, and finally, choosing your pattern. Let's start with Section 1, Patterns and Endings, the container. I really want you to think about the container you've built for your life. To understand this, we need to define our two core terms right out of the gate. The pattern is your container. It's your mindset, your worldview, literally the scope of your perspective. The ending is your outcome, your destiny, the actual real-world results you achieve. And the entire premise of this explainer rests on one undeniable rule. Your ending can never, ever outgrow your pattern. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept through three metaphors. First, think of a pan and a pancake. The pan is the pattern, the pancake is the ending. The physical size of the pan absolutely determines the maximum size of the pancake, right? You literally cannot bake a cake larger than the pan you pour the batter into. Second, a puddle is a pattern, and the fish inside it are the ending. The depth and width of that water strictly dictates the size and quality of the fish that can survive there. And finally, think of space itself as a pattern. If your space is tiny, it can only hold a single grain of sand. But if your pattern is vast, it can hold the sun, the moon, the earth, and all the stars and galaxies. The physical size of your environment restricts your outcome. Moving right along to Section 2, the trap of comparison, the root of small patterns. So you might be wondering, what keeps our patterns so incredibly small? Well, it's jealousy. The text gives us three distinct examples of how comparing yourself to your peers keeps you totally trapped. If a shepherd is jealous of another shepherd simply because they have more sheep, that shepherd will never be anything more than a shepherd. If a beggar is jealous of another beggar who somehow gets more food that day, they're never going to be more than a beggar. And if a monkey is jealous of another monkey whose butt is redder than his own, he will always be a monkey. The point here is that comparing yourself to your immediate peers keeps you permanently trapped in what the author calls the human pot. You're using a human pan, so you can only bake a human pancake. You simply cannot transcend your situation if your eyes are solely fixed on the person standing right next to you. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the size of your opponent literally dictates the size of your future. The text points out that those who challenge lions and those who challenge mice have fundamentally different patterns, and therefore entirely different endings. If you challenge an emperor, you at least have the potential to become an emperor. But if your big ambition is just to challenge a beggar, well, the ultimate, absolute best-case scenario is that you become a beggar. Your pattern is defined by what you choose to push against. Which brings us to Section 3, praising your enemies, expanding your pattern. How does this pattern react when we're threatened by peers in the real, modern world of market competition? I mean, we've all heard this old proverb, right? Peers are enemies. Well, the source text brings this up to immediately debunk it. It states that people who regard their peers as enemies only do so because their patterns are simply too small. The author uses a great, slightly humorous metaphor here. He says sheep might not be satisfied with goats farting, but at the end of the day, they are all just sheep. Competing over who is the slightly better sheep doesn't change the fact that you're in the exact same flock. To ground this, the author shares a very modern anecdote. He talks about browsing the web and watching a famous internet figure, someone he really highly respected who had produced hundreds of high-quality videos. But suddenly, this creator used his platform to attack another well-known videographer in the same niche, calling him a liar. For the author, his respect for this creator collapsed in an instant. Why? Because it revealed a shockingly small pattern. Instead of expanding his universe, the creator was just fighting over scraps in a tiny puddle. People with patterns that small cannot bring clarity or peace to the world around them. Let's see how this builds into a clear framework of behavior. Small patterns are characterized by belittling others, attacking peers, bullying the weak, engaging in petty internal strife, and constantly showing off. But big pattern behaviors are the exact opposite. People with big patterns acknowledge their opponents. They actively praise their enemies. They inspire others rather than tearing them down. And crucially, they are willing to endure humiliation for a larger goal. Big patterns are built on uplifting the world, not suppressing it. I really want this quote to sink in for a moment. Those who praise their enemies have limitless patterns. When you can look at a fierce competitor or an enemy and genuinely acknowledge their strengths without feeling personally diminished, Your container is no longer a small pan or a puddle. It has become as vast as space itself. It is limitless. Section 4. Enduring for the ending. Mental fortitude. Having a limitless pattern isn't just about saying nice things. It requires an incredible amount of mental fortitude. The text gives us the visceral story of Han Xin. He was a man with a massive destiny, but one day he was confronted and humiliated by petty street thugs. They demanded he literally crawl between their legs. Now, a person with a small pattern would have let their ego take over. They would have fought, maybe died, or at least wasted immense energy on a completely meaningless street brawl. But Han Xin had a massive pattern. He simply chose to endure the humiliation, crawling between their legs, so he wouldn't waste his precious time and energy. He ignored the mouse to stay focused on the lion. An even more intense example from the text is King Gujian of the Yu Kingdom. To achieve his ultimate strategic ending of defeating his enemy, King Wu, Gujian endured absolute, crushing humiliation. He slept on painful brushwood just to keep his bitterness alive. He sent his own wife to his enemy's bed. The text notes he even went as far as tasting King Wu's feces to prove his false submission. Now, I know this is an extreme historical anecdote, but it proves the point. A truly big pattern completely subjugates the temporary ego to secure the ultimate long-term ending. The author ties this historical endurance to Pu Songlang, a writer who faced repeated, crushing frustrations in his career, but never let it shrink his pattern or depress him. Pu Songlang wrote this epic couplet, "Where there is a will, there is a way. Heaven does not fail people who exert efforts." He wrote about burning bridges and sleeping on brushwood to conquer kingdoms. His physical reality was frustrating, sure, but his internal pattern remained huge, ensuring his legacy would completely outlast his temporary failures. And finally, Section 5. Choosing your pattern. Applying it today. We need to bring these abstract concepts right into your daily life. The author poses a fantastic, highly relatable question. Imagine you're just walking down the street, minding your own business, and someone bumps into you. Ask yourself right now, honestly, what is your immediate gut reaction? So the crucial point is how you actually respond to that exact moment. A person with a small pattern instantly goes on the offensive. They scold the person and say, "Are you blind?" They aggressively protect their tiny puddle. But a person with a large pattern, they just smile and say, "I'm sorry, please forgive me for being in your way." They completely diffuse the conflict. Not because they're weak, but because their pattern is way too big to waste time arguing with a random stranger on the sidewalk. They keep their momentum, moving forward toward their actual goals. And really, this is the core thesis of our entire explainer. With a small pattern, you are doomed to march in place or worse, retreat. You are just fighting other sheep. You are baking a tiny pancake. But the bigger your pattern, the better your ending. You have the agency right now to swap out your pan for a bigger one. You can choose to expand your container. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought from the source material. Do you want to be a celestial being? Do you want an ending that transcends the ordinary? If you do, the instructions are crystal clear. Stop comparing yourself to peers. Stop fussing over petty slights. Stop competing over who has the redder butt. Expand your container, praise your enemies, and step into a limitless pattern. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I challenge you to look at the size of your pan today.